Protectionism and the chicken tax. What is protectionism? Protectionism is the theory or practice of shielding a country's domestic industries from foreign competition by taxing imports. Why would a country impose protectionist policy? In order to render goods and services more competitive in domestic markets while increasing federal revenues. What is the cost? The consumer and domestic markets. Protectionism over the years. Typically, a goal of the U.S. is to work hard toward a world with lower trade barriers and offer protection for specific industries. One industry that benefits from the protectionist policy is Harley-Davidson in the 1980s. During this time, they were unable to compete with Japanese motorcycles, so President Reagan placed a tariff on the imported bikes, giving Harley-Davidson time to retool their company and become competitive again. This worked so well that the protectionist policy implemented was removed early by the request of Harley-Davidson themselves. Another example is the protectionism implemented on semiconductors in the 1980s. This was controversial because of its effect on industries that use semiconductors, creating shortages, higher costs, loss of sales, and jobs. Unintended harm to American companies is a recurring problem with tariffs and protectionism policies. An interesting effect of protectionist policy is the possible creation of trade wars. A trade war is a situation in which countries try to damage each other's trade, typically by the imposition of tariffs or quota restrictions. If President Trump were to impose a very high tariff on imported Chinese goods to, quote, level the playing field, then the U.S. would be forced to produce a lot of its goods domestically. Because we are not as good or efficient at producing some of the goods that China makes for us, this would cause U.S. consumer prices to spike. Not only would this hurt our economy, but of course, additionally, China would be negatively impacted. Therefore, nobody wins in this situation. Additionally, trade wars could be used in a way to support a nation's domestic business growth. Given the same situation, the domestic U.S. businesses, of course, would benefit. However, the consumer of this economy will not, because they will still have to pay higher prices to make up the domestic producers' lack of resources or efficiency. Probably the greatest highlight of a trade war in American history is the chicken tax. Germany in the early 1960s did not have a great domestic market concerning the production of chicken. This was solved by trade with the U.S., who produced chicken plentifully and at a cheap price for the Germans, much cheaper than German producers were able to offer. This upset the German producers, and they demanded from the government that protectionist policy be laid out as to keep them more competitive in the domestic market. The German government complied, thus sparking a trade war between the U.S. and Germany. You see, America did not appreciate this tax on their chicken exports, so they responded with a tax of their own. A tax on all foreign-produced trucks and vans at the rate of 25%. This was not arbitrary by any means. During this time, Volkswagen Beetles were selling like hotcakes in the U.S., and they were also about to release a cheap truck that was sure to impress. Domestic auto manufacturers were not happy about this. Creating this tax catered to the auto manufacturers in the States as well as sticking it to Germany. This tax was dubiously called the chicken tax. This tax, for the coming decades, would cripple foreign auto manufacturers such as Toyota and Subaru, both who would do whatever they could to get around the tax, but to no avail. To this day, we still have the chicken tax, even though it is rendered unnecessary these days. This is due to a dynamic of protectionist policy, where once it is put into effect, it is hard to take out of effect. This is because of the advantage it offers domestic producers who have great special interest powers in the government. By the chicken tax existing, we also have seen a severe complacency and innovation by domestic truck producers because of the non-competitive playing field they operate in. With all this said, is protectionism a good policy for the economy as a whole? While it is clear that domestic producers benefit from such policy, the consumer and the general efficiency of the economy suffer greatly. For these reasons, the cost-benefit is better if we stick to a tried-and-true version of the free market system, which helps apply the theory of comparative advantage, increases exports, enabling a higher quality of exports, boosting U.S. jobs and economic growth, creates economies of scale, ultimately leading to lower prices for consumers and greater efficiency for exporting firms, increases competition for the low-end prices more perfectly, and makes use of surplus raw materials. For example, Middle Eastern countries such as Qatar are very rich in reserves of oil, but without trade, they would not be much benefit at all with having that oil. Japan, on the other hand, has very few raw materials. Without trade, it would have a very low GDP. As we have seen, while protectionism might seem like a good idea, in the big picture, it has a tendency to cause more harm.